EVO. Welcome back to The Devil Within. Been spending a lot of time in the Alps lately, and it's given us fear in snow, fear in forests, and fear inside the human mind. Tonight, those threads meet in a place where belief, art, and suffering all came together, and left behind a picture that still watches from a church wall. If you're drawn to stories that explore not just events, but the emotional and psychological terrain beneath them, following The Devil Within helps others find these deeper journeys too. Please leave a rate and review if you have the time. Edgar Allan Poe once wrote about truths that are glimpsed only briefly, moments half seen, yet powerful enough to linger long after the vision fades. This story lives in that half-light. Welcome back to The Devil Within. You're listening to The Devil in the Painting. This is Chapter 1, The Sanctuary in the Hills. The road to Madonna di Pinè climbs in slow turns through forest and stone. Today, cars make the journey in minutes. In the early 1700s, it would have been a long ascent on foot or mule, maybe horses. The path worn smooth by generations of pilgrims seeking relief from burdens that they could no longer carry alone. The sanctuary sits above the valley like a quiet lookout, not grand enough to impress from a distance, but deeply rooted in the lives of the people below. Faith in the Alpine regions has never existed in the abstract. It grew out of necessity. These were communities shaped by avalanche and illness, by winters that could easily outlast their food supplies, and by landscapes where survival would often feel like a negotiation rather than a certainty. Churches were not only houses of worship. They were places where fear could be named and hope could be made visible. Madonna di Pinè became known as one of those places. Centuries before the painting that would one day draw national and global attention, the sanctuary had already been associated with protection and healing. Stories circulated of prayers answered, of illnesses eased, of dangers averted. Whether one interprets these as miracles or as the natural comfort that comes from shared belief, the result was the same. People climbed that hill when they had nowhere else to go. In the year 1731, one of those people was a woman from the surrounding region whose name, unfortunately, history has not preserved, but whose suffering left a mark that endured. Accounts recorded by the church speak of troubling changes in her behavior, sudden emotional outbursts, periods of withdrawal so deep that she seemed unreachable, episodes in which her voice shifted in tone and intensity, words emerging that felt foreign to those who knew her. There were reports of aversion to sacred objects, of agitation during prayer, and of a presence in her demeanor that frightened family members who were accustomed to hardship, but not to this. In a world without modern psychiatry, such experiences did not fit into medical language. We know what they fit into: spiritual language. They thought she was possessed. To the people around her, this was not an illness arising from within. It was an affliction imposed from without. Something had taken hold of her, something that did not belong. And so they made the climb on foot up that hill to the sanctuary. The room where the exorcism ritual would take place was modest, stone walls, candles casting warm light that barely pushed back the shadows in the corners, smell of wax and old wood, the murmur of prayers spoken not loudly, but with the kind of steadiness that comes from repetition across centuries. Family members likely stood by, fear and hope intermingling in equal measure. Priests prepared themselves with the rites known to them, rituals passed down through generations for moments when suffering seemed to exceed ordinary explanation. Exorcism in that era wasn't theatrical in the way later stories would portray it. It was solemn, it was structured, anchored in prayer and command. The priest would have invoked divine authority, not to harm but to free, to call whatever was believed to be afflicting the woman and demand its departure. We don't know every word spoken that day. What we do know is what people later insisted they saw. At some point in the ritual, witnesses said her body convulsed, her voice rose in tones that felt alien to those who loved her, and then, in a moment that froze itself into collective memory, something appeared to leave her, described as dark, serpentine, almost dragon-like, emerging from her mouth as though expelled by force. Was it a trick of light? Was it a physical reaction interpreted through belief? A symbolic moment later rendered literal in retelling? We can't know. What we do know is that the people in that room believed something real had happened, something powerful enough to commission a painting. Not as art for admiration, but as testimony. Because once suffering has a shape, it can be remembered as something that ended. And for a community living under the constant reminder that life can fracture without warning, that kind of ending mattered more than any explanation. Chapter 2. When suffering was given a shape. So the painting is small. That's the first thing people notice when they finally stand in front of it. After the long walk through the sanctuary, past the candles beneath the stone arches and the quiet murmur of other visitors, the image doesn't dominate the wall. It's like it's waiting for you. It's modest. It's almost easy to miss it if you don't know what you're looking for. But once your eyes settle on it, it doesn't let you go. The woman is painted kneeling, her posture curved inward, her hands clasped not in peace, but in strain. The priest stands beside her, hand raised in blessing or maybe in command. The scene's intimate. It's not grand, it's not theatrical. It's intimate. The room is small and the colors are muted by age. And then there's the figure between them, dark, winged, serpentine, emerging from the woman's mouth like a physical thing made of shadow and muscle. Its form isn't anatomically precise. It belongs to the visual language of the time, when evil was depicted with features borrowed from dragons and reptiles and other beasts. But it is clearly meant to be leaving her body, not attacking her. Leaving. And that distinction is super important. These paintings are called ex votos, and they're not paintings of terror. They're paintings of survival, and they exist because something ended well enough for gratitude to take physical form. A shipwreck survived, a fall endured, an illness overcome. The Madonna di Pinè painting belongs to that tradition. It's not a portrait of possession, it's a portrait of release. And to understand why that image carried such weight, you need to step into the mindset of an alpine community in the early 18th century, where illness was common, where injury was expected. But changes of the mind, sudden shifts in personality or speech, behavior, all of those things struck at something deeper, because they unsettled not just the body, but the identity. And without medical frameworks to categorize these experiences, the language of faith came in and filled the space. The person wasn't disordered or traumatized. They were afflicted. Something had entered their life that didn't belong. That belief carried fear, yeah, but also hope. Because if something could enter, then guess what? It could also leave. The ritual at the sanctuary gave structure to that hope, and it created a narrative arc. Suffering, confrontation, expulsion, relief. Whether the cause was spiritual, psychological, or a mixture we still struggle to name, the ritual marked a turning point, and the painting marked that turning point permanently. In many other ex voto paintings, the moment of danger is shown in one corner of the image. A cart's overturned, or a person falling from a ladder, a storm at sea. Then, in a different part of the painting, the person appears safe, often kneeling in prayer and in thanks. The Madonna di Pinè image collapses those two moments into one. The danger and the relief occupy the same space. The before and after are separated only by the shape of something leaving the body. The whole how it started and how it's going. All right, well, this visual compression tells us something about how the community understood what exactly happened. They didn't see the event as a slow recovery. They saw it as a decisive moment, a threshold crossed, a boundary restored. For people who lived with constant environmental uncertainty, that kind of clarity would have felt really powerful. Avalanches don't announce themselves. Illness doesn't always fade cleanly. But in that room, in that story, suffering had a visible exit, and that visibility is key. Invisible pain is isolating. It leaves the sufferer and the community grasping for proof that change is possible. The painting provided proof. Now look, not in the scientific sense. I'm talking the emotional one. It said, we saw the turning point. We witnessed the end of the struggle. Over time, religious pilgrims climbing to the sanctuary would have seen the painting and heard the story. It would have reinforced a worldview in which the unseen could be confronted, in which darkness could be named and expelled. For families facing similar distress, the image would have offered both warning and comfort. Warning that such affliction was possible, and comfort that it was not necessarily permanent. And the image also reveals something about human need. We want to see pain leave. Modern medicine usually works invisibly. Chemicals, balancing neurotransmitters, therapies shifting thought patterns over months or years. But in 1731, healing was most reassuring when it could be pictured. A fever breaking, a wound closing, a demon departing in visible form. The painting answered that need. It turned a complex, possibly psychological event into a very clear narrative. Evil out, person restored. But beneath the reassurance, another layer remained. If suffering could be given a shape, then that shape could be feared. And fear, once shaped, does not disappear as easily as paint on wood. Chapter 3. The Devil We Need to See. So what was in that room in 1731? Was it a demon? Maybe a psychological crisis interpreted through faith? A ritual that gave structure and meaning to a mind in distress? From the distance of nearly 300 years, we can't say, obviously, with any certainty. But the power of the painting was never in its scientific proof. It was in emotional clarity. The image gave suffering a shape. And that act, giving pain a form separate from the self, is something humans have done across cultures, across centuries, across belief systems. Because the hardest suffering to endure is the kind that feels like it is you. A broken arm is painful, but it's visible. You can see it. It's contained. It's something you could point to and say, this hurts. Here's the injury. But when the mind turns against itself, when fear or despair or rage or voices seem to arise from nowhere, the boundary between self and suffering blurs. The person experiencing it may feel as though they're losing ownership of their own thoughts, their own reactions, their own identity. That is a uniquely terrifying form of vulnerability. In religious language, it becomes possession, something foreign invading the self. In psychological language, it might be trauma, it might be dissociation, mood disorder, psychosis. The explanations differ, but the emotional core remains. This does not feel like me. The ex voto at Madonna di Pinè answered that fear with a visible story. The suffering was not the woman. The suffering was something on her, something that could be commanded to leave. That distinction carries enormous psychological weight. Even today, therapists often help patients externalize their pain, to see depression, anxiety, or trauma as something they are experiencing rather than something they are. And that shift is subtle, but it can open the space just enough to let healing begin. It says, hey, you're still here. You are not identical to your suffering. The ritual in 1731, whatever it was, ordered that same separation in the language available at the time. The community gathered. Authority figures invoked protection. a narrative unfolded in which darkness was confronted and expelled. Whether the woman's improvement came from spiritual intervention, psychological release, community support, or a combination of all three, the result felt real enough to be painted and preserved. And that preservation also tells us something else. The Alps have always been places where humans feel small. Avalanches destroy things without regard for names. Storms erase trails and kill people in the woods without apology. Forests swallow light and distort sound. In landscapes where the environment so clearly exceeds human control, it makes sense that people would also imagine unseen forces shaping their inner lives. If the mountain can shift without warning, if Lindsey Vonn can misjudge a line by 5 inches and destroy her leg, why not the mind? If storms can roll in from nowhere, why not despair or rage? The stories that we followed through this Alpine series, creatures in snow, voices in forests, battles in sanctuaries, a demon leaving a painted mouth, they're different expressions of the same human impulse. We want the world to make sense. We want suffering to have a cause that we can name, and we want danger to have edges that are visible. Because when the causes are invisible, we create images to hold them. Sometimes those images become monsters. Sometimes they become rituals. Sometimes they become paintings that hang quietly on a chapel wall for centuries, waiting for someone to stand before it and wonder what the witnesses truly saw. Maybe the devil in that painting wasn't a creature with wings. Maybe it was the shape a community gave to a moment when pain loosened its grip, when a woman who had felt lost to herself began to return. The image made that return visible. Invisibility in the face of fear is a kind of power, because when suffering has a form, people can gather around it. They can tell a story about it. They can believe in a happy ending. Even if the true causes remain hidden, the shared meaning becomes real in its own way. And in places like the Alps, where winter reminds everyone how little they ultimately control, that shared meaning may be as important as any explanation. So these winter games are going to be coming to a close soon. The crowds are going to thin, the lights dim, the mountains will return to their older rhythms. The slopes that held competition fall quiet again. Tracks soften under fresh snow, the spectacle fades, but the peaks remain, vast, silent, indifferent. For centuries, people in those mountains have stood in that silence and tried to understand the forces shaping their lives. They've given names to what frightened them, shapes to what they couldn't see, stories to what felt unbearable. A creature in the snow, a voice in the trees, a battle in a quiet room, a demon leaving a woman. Different forms, same need. To believe that suffering is not endless, that darkness can be named, that even in a world larger and colder than we'd like, something can shift, something can leave, and a person can find their way back to themselves. Maybe that's the real miracle these mountains have always offered. Not that the unknown disappears, but that humans keep gathering. We keep telling stories. We keep searching for meaning, even when the peaks stand silent above us. Next week on The Devil Within, we leave the Alps behind and step into a different landscape of fear. Not one shaped by mountains or sanctuaries, but by a single house, and the people who believed something inside it refused to leave. Because sometimes the devil doesn't live in legend or landscape. Sometimes it waits behind the front door.